Alrighty, and we're live. So before we really get started, I just wanted to say thank you once again for jumping on. For those who don't know, this is my guy Jess Cherry. We've had a couple good conversations in the past, and I think that he lends a lot of really good perspectives to just the general, I don't know, the topics of conversation that we may or may not be thinking of on a subconscious level, if that makes sense. So Jess lives in Massachusetts, lives on a farm, um, and he does a lot of like just being a little bit divergent from the regular way of life. The suburban slash urban way of life can kind of give you some more insights as to how life actually is in a way, because it's a little bit more disconnected from the structure that we try to place on ourselves. And so today we just wanted to talk a little bit about silence and solitude, and if that plays a role in kind of how we move forward. And so right now, as we're recording this, is June 9th, 2020. And I think we're about a week or so after the whole George Floyd situation. And one of the things that has been super, I don't know, prevalent on social media is this idea of uh, say something, like just put something out there, say it, even if it's wrong, just say it. And this moniker that's come out of that is silence is violence. And you hit me up earlier this week saying you wanted to talk about that. And so I just wanted to kind of throw this over to you before we got too deep into it, and just kind of like explain to anybody who might be listening what maybe you took away from that idea of silence as violence, and maybe some of the pros and cons, or maybe some of the things you saw good first, and then we can start
Yeah,
kind of moving towards where it can be harmful.
right. Well, yeah, so I mean, even I really bought into it hard. And really I have for the last couple of years just really agreed with the idea that if you see something wrong or if you know something, if you're aware of something, you need to be having those conversations. You need to be vocal, or you need to be active in whatever that is. If it's Black Lives Matter, or if it's climate change, or if
Yeah.
it's gay, queer rights, transgender rights, whatever you like feel energy towards, you need to be talking about it. There's a lot of fucked up things going on, in this world, but specifically our mini world within this world, our Western civilization, our you know industrial uh complex
Complex.
that we
Yeah.
live in.
Jinx.
Yeah, for real. And so it's like, so then the pro is like, yeah, we're finally waking up to the reality that we live in an oppressive community, and it's not okay if you're privileged or you're one of the oppressors to be silent about the realities of our ugly system.
Mhm.
um, it is violent to know something and not act on
Yeah, and that kind of gets
it.
into, I didn't want to cut you off, but I think what you're maybe angling towards, and what I kind of wanted to get at too, is when you know something, or when you have the correct like context and understanding to effectively speak to that thing, right? So like there are some things that are just clear as day. This person gets hurt, I should speak to that. But there are some things that are so layered and so convoluted that it gets a little bit more difficult to speak with any level of real confidence. And I think, I don't know if that's what you were getting to, but I think that that's something that we can start to, I don't know, internalize a bit, because it just seems to me that a lot of people are yelling and it becomes a yelling chamber instead of any real engagement and learning that's happening.
Right. Yeah, totally want to get into it. And what I'm noticing is, particularly within the privileged of this system, it's like almost you can check a box, or you can say a certain socially acceptable thing or spread awareness to a certain subject, and then that seems to be within this social media world that we've created. That seems to be enough, and
Yeah.
I am not with that. I think
Amen.
that is so it's actually, I think it's really harmful, not only because it it just clearly isn't enough. It doesn't do anything except, you know, maybe.
Broadcast to the world. It's like a signal. Like you're just kind of signaling at that point. Like I'm not racist. Like that's kind of what it feels like.
But here's the problem with that. If you're white living in the system, you're an oppressor. It's just clear cut.
I appreciate
And
you
so,
saying that because that's not clear to a lot of people.
right. So the whole history is there. We can look at the history. The history's been clear, and people are definitely starting to read certain books and dig up certain things and realize the past, right? But I think we're missing how we're oppressing right now, and how we're likely going to be oppressing in the future, as specifically, white people and just the privileged in general, right? We uh, you know I've been really thinking about Malcolm X's analogy between the fox and the wolf. Have you heard this?
Yeah,
Right. So he's talking to he's sharing truth about white liberals who really think that they're woke, and they're really supporting the oppressed people.
yeah. No, I saw that when you sent me that message with the liberal foxes. I was like, oh, okay, Jess knows what's going on. Because yeah,
Yeah.
no, go keep speaking on it though. Sorry.
Well, so then it's like, okay, do the white liberals understand that they're playing a game? They're upholding a system, if they're just plugging in and then carrying out their life, not changing anything of their behaviors, not changing patterns of their ancestors, or patterns of their parents, or patterns of their childhood, or
You
i-
know.
if if you're not, look, we like to think we're Jesus. We like to think we got this righteousness inside of us. And too many
Yeah.
of us are not understanding that we're Lucifer. Or better yet, since we have a martyr of George Floyd, we like
Mm,
to think we're John the Beloved, and like
yeah.
we're not Judas. But we're Judas. We're fucking Judas. And so it's like, I don't want to hear, I don't, all right, let me just calm down a bit. I'm not,
Go
I'm
ahead.
not interested in hearing specific white liberals who say they're woke, and say how wrong the system is, but then they're getting Starbucks every day, or or and we already know stories about Starbucks. And I'm not saying if you go to
Yeah.
Starbucks, you're wrong. I'm not
But
saying
I
that.
know I see the irony in everything you're saying because they're plugging into the same system that is oppressing in order to broadcast that message. So there's a little bit of a like it's an irony there because you have corporations, like you have banks who have used like historically done things like redlining, right? Like you have like Bank of America comes out with their black box on Instagram, and now all of a sudden are they woke enough to where we just forget about the decades literally of institutionalized racist practices that they fostered. And so the same
Mhm.
thing with people, you could have fostered some terrible thoughts or feelings in your heart. And the only way to really get through that, like to transmute those energy or to just think through them or to feel them deeply is to actually get to that place where you're dealing with it. And
Right.
if you're almost being socially congratulated for just putting out some sort of public statement, then you never even get there. You just stay
Right.
on the surface and think that that's okay.
Yeah, this is complex. This is
Yeah.
this is this is so challenging for anyone to understand, just the capacity of the human, how low and how high we can go. It is just so excruciatingly hard.
And we want
And
simple solutions.
right, none. And so this is my thing with silence. Like,
And I do
silence.
want, before you get into this, I wanted to preface this by saying, like, one of the ways that you kind of contextualize this discussion that I really liked is when you ca- when you hit me up on Facebook, you called it the paradox of silence. And I think that
Mm.
that's a really good way to put it too, and just to kind of frame the thoughts moving forward. So, your
Right.
thoughts on
Mm.
silence and how that can kind of be a paradox.
Well, yeah. So it leads to how we really started this conversation. The idea of the monk on top of the mountain who's meditating to liberate all beings, right? To become enlightened themselves, and then in that process, through this ideology, like you can't be enlightened without all beings being enlightened.
Right.
That's kind of the gist of a lot of mystic ideas. Um, so there's that type of silence where you kind of stay remote, right?
Hmm.
And then there's the silence where, yeah, maybe you go up on that mountain and you're really reflecting, you're really meditating, you're really trying to understand the mind and all of the different qualities, the Jesus in you and the Lucifer in you, and how they all, dance together really, and how they enter your mind and leave your mind. And so you're trying to get comfortable with this idea, and then you go back to your community, you go back to your people, your family, your neighbors, and then you bring back
That new energy. Right.
these gifts, this new energy, this new perspective, um,
Yeah.
this new really like soul power that
Yeah.
can either uh, enlighten others, or it can help them get on the path where they go up on the mountain and then come back, and then it starts to ripple on that way.
That's a beautiful image too. I think that kind of speaks to the metaphor I've been using is we need a hard reset right now, I think, as a culture. And part of that means, like, even when the computer doesn't work, right? Sometimes you just unplug it for 10 seconds and then you plug it back in, and then maybe things start to work. And right now we're just perpetually plugged in. And
Mm,
we have, whether it's for fear of being forgotten or fear of not getting the right, like getting your opinion across or whatever it might be, we we don't have that time to just unplug, especially now where it feels like to not say something or to not like that status or to not whatever feels like, oh, I'm not doing enough. Like, we've so cheapened the value of what it means to have justice that we've
mm.
we've just changed the balances a little bit. And I don't think it does us any good. And so
Right.
I think that, and what's something that you actually said that kind of I think is important as well, is that silence is not the same as inaction. Like you just kind of said it, like going up to that mountain and finding that perspective within you. It's not just a
Mhm.
passive process, right? Like it's something that requires some sort of work and some sort of internal digging. Maybe you could
And
speak to that a little bit. Yeah.
it's really daily. It's a
Yeah.
daily process. Like you got to
Mhm.
go up on that mountain every morning. You
Right.
gotta slow down every morning. You gotta pray every morning. You gotta, read your texts every morning.
Yeah.
It's like it's that really ritual or that pattern that you start
The
creating.
process.
It's a
Yeah.
process that it expands you and expands you and expands you. And really, I think it's a matter of um, like the Buddhists like to think we have two wings, right? We
Okay.
have the wings of compassion and the wings of wisdom, and we need to be exercising both wings every single day. So that's like, expanding heart.
Okay.
And I think privileged people owe it to themselves and oppressed people to expand their heart, because we've been like epigenetically weak-hearted for
Oh,
years
that
and
is a
years.
good word.
And so then there's that, and then there's the wisdom, right? Which is
Okay.
both education, awareness, and then action. It's like I really like it's a mutual friend of ours, Keaton. You
Oh
know,
yeah, he's a good dude.
yeah, he is. He posted on that silence post that I had, and
Yeah.
talking about how, yeah, knowledge plus action equals wisdom, and that's how we
Yeah.
do.
I
And
like that.
so, like, so then there's that, right? And then we already know, we have enough evidence that activism is
It's a bit
is
of a
a huge,
fallacy.
well, it's a fallacy, but it's a burnout field. And that's, I think it
Mm,
plays into the fallacy, right?
okay,
Because
I see where you're coming from. Yeah,
because um it's so much about like
very
activism.
intensive.
It's us versus them mentality,
Yeah,
right?
combative. It's that's the nature of it, right? To be radicalized almost implies that you are inherently combative, and
Right.
that can go off on a whole nother tangent.
It
Um,
could.
but no,
But
like
it,
seriously, I think that that's a big part of it.
and to play into it with silence in mind, if if we're not understanding the entire capacity of silence, what it can do for our heart, what it can do
Mhm.
for wisdom, what it can do for resiliency, and what it can do for our generosity, which are all the things that really combat the burnout of activism, or combat the us them mentality that activists typically have. Then we don't fully understand silence, and that is, I think that's a
That's
problem.
important. Wow, the capacity of silence. It almost feels like an oxymoron in a way, especially in
Mhm.
our culture where
Right.
everything is so busy. Like we don't realize how much can be done in that space between impulses, between, I don't know, different sensory inputs, like when we just intentionally just with ourselves.
Mm.
That's so deep because it works on a couple levels too. The way I see it in a lot of ways is that just physical silence is kind of like that starting point, right? Just like auditory silence. But then it kind of works its way internally to where you have that inner sense of peace. And that can only come through that intentional engagement with that idea of being silent. So I think another question I had for you is because with the whole, especially this stage of our collective development, let's say, I think it's seen as good to be vocally, um I don't know, explicit about where you stand. um and it's kind of seen as like in line with that woke mentality. It's like if you can verbalize it, then you're legitimized in a way.
Mm.
I don't know if that's also a little bit harmful because it kind of can sometimes pigeonhole us in one sense, or it can kind of freeze our development to where if we get a lot of positive feedback for an idea or a post or something that maybe wasn't 100% true, but it had enough of an iota in it that, but if you integrate that into your own person, now you've almost stagnated, right? Like you said, this Black Lives Matter, blah, blah, blah. If it comes out in a year that this is actually what Black Lives Matter was, then you feel like you're a fraud. But at the end of the day, what are you underpinning under that? Like, what is the reality that you're trying to that you're trying to push or pursue?
Right.
I think one of the problems is that we're all trying to influence each other.
Mm.
None of us are trying to influence ourselves.
Mm.
And so I guess my question off that is, how do we get away from trying to monitor and police other people to becoming better, just internal policemen and women?
Yeah, that's a wild question. That's a
Man,
great question. Well, so it's hard because we're like, Homo sapien, we're great apes and social beings. So it's like, yeah, in some ways it's unsafe to leave the social sphere to really to investigate how or what or who you are. Um,
mhm.
and and so I don't know if I have a clear answer for that. I
That's
know
interesting.
I know my family, were on my case about that post. And
Really?
yeah, and so your question kind of like engages that a little bit, because
Mhm.
I think we can lose sight in our own gifts, or what we personally bring to the entire Earth community, no less the Black community, and you
Right.
know, whatever community we choose to engage with. Um, and so it's like I've been thinking a lot about this, BuzzFeed, you know, thing that I kept seeing pop up in the last week, like 72 ways that you can be an ally. And I'm not, I think there are there's a general structure that could be helpful for the general consensus,
Hmm.
like uh just listen to your Black friends tell stories. Like, I'm sure that was on there. And just like show up and protect your Black people. Like, if you're seeing some shady business with cops, take out your phone, or confront the cop, or
Yeah.
like all these things, right? But then but then outside of that 72 is something like I specifically bring to this conversation. And if I only follow what's in the 72, man, I'm not bringing my full self, and I'm not actually in it for the long haul. I'm not committed my entire life to a specific thing, because I'm following what other people
That's
are
where the
are
wisdom comes in, right?
yeah, right.
Because there's that wisdom, which is like the higher level, like applying and understanding versus just the knowledge, which is kind of like that. It's more like the data, almost like you have you have a little piece of the picture, and wisdom is being able to understand what that means and
Yeah,
how to maneuver. And so it kind of like transitions or translates the rules into like values and principles that you can live by in a way that's more I don't know, sustainable, I guess, like in a way that just makes more sense, where you're not having to check a BuzzFeed article to make sure you're doing the right thing, but you have such a strong internal barometer that you understand what to do just out
right.
of your nature, right?
Right. I do think we need to also plan more. We need to be
Mhm.
planning like deep, like not only just like in the next year, because we can lose things so quickly, but we need to be planning for the next 5, 10, 20, 50 years, generations into the future. Like, what do we actually want this community to look like? What
That's important.
what are we going towards, right? We already know, we or a lot of us know the problems,
Yeah.
and the problems have been there here since day one. um, and so we need to reboot this system real quick,
Yeah.
because we already know where this earth is going, and we
I
already
think the
know.
problem with the reboot, at least my theory of the problem with the reboot, is that there are so many programs running that
Right.
are off of that old operating system, and those programs are in some ways self-serving, and they don't want to be like, when you update the phone, like some of the things might look little bit different, they might not act the same way, right? So it's kind of like this. I almost feel like a lot of our stagnation is through fear.
Oh
It's
yeah.
like fear of like letting go, and it might not be explicitly racist, like, oh, like I hate, brown people, but it might manifest more as just a sense of discomfort because of your way of life being maybe looking a little bit different, or the things that you have to incorporate into who you are, or how you act around people. And so I don't
Right.
know, man, like there's so much to it.
Right.
And yeah, like another thing I wanted to ask you about too is that you talked about this guy named the Planet Walker.
Yeah.
Yeah, like expand on that a little bit for the people, because I think that that's another interesting tidbit as to why, I don't know, silence can be something that we use as a tool,
Yeah.
and instead of something that is always deemed as a negative.
Right. Yeah, so this dude, it's somewhere in his 20s, he witnessed an oil spill off the coast of San Francisco Bay, and it shook him so much that he decided to not use any vehicle or transportation that used gas.
Mm,
Um, and so and so he would walk everywhere, right? And you know, his family and, you know, friends would start to like uh kind of jab at him a little bit, like, why are you doing this, uh like, do you think you're better than us? And people would offer him a ride on the road, like when he was, you know, just walking, and and they would get really upset at him for not jumping in the car, you know, like, they
right.
were trying to do a good thing, and and this person
That's
didn't
another
want.
tangent, isn't it? Like sometimes people like it's like they force the good thing on you, and if you don't accept it, now it's like, nah. It's like, okay, so why were you doing that thing? You know what I
Exactly.
mean? But keep going.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so then, you know, I think it's like 4 years into his absence of transportation, he decides, he sort of wakes up to this idea that he's actually engaging in the fighting. He's going back and forth with these people, like, um, and really causing perhaps more suffering in that. Um, uh, because I think anytime we feel moved to go down our own path, um, so, and we don't always know why we're going down that path, I think we can get a little nippy with other people, um,
Mhm.
because we don't even understand why we're on this path, right?
That's facts.
So he decides to uh, one day he decides to take a day of silence as like a gesture to his community, as like a real, like, I don't want to fight with you anymore. This is an act of love. um we're not going to have these conversations, like, uh I'm going to be cultivating that space inside of me, and still, you know, carry on my walking path. And so that day kept multiplying, you know, months, you know, years, right? And this dude, right? I was telling you, he wasn't sedentary. Like, he was walking everywhere, right? Like, states. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, you know, the fact is, like, he walked in 48 of the states of America, and then down Central America and into South America. And he got his bachelor's degree without speaking or transportation. He got his master's
Wow.
degree without those two things. He got his PhD without those two things. And all the while, he's going to these protests, because protests are a good thing, and he's engaging with the communities of these climate change uh, activists, or, you know, earth people that are worried about the state of the earth. and
Yeah.
and and then, so, you know, 17 years later for silence, and 22 years later for not walking, he speaks at, you know, like some government, like, union stated address about climate change and oil
Using
and
his voice for
what we need
something
to be
important.
doing.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just, and so I read this in a book. It's his book. It's called The Ragged Edge of Silence, which is an epic title. The
Mm. And what
Ragged
was his name
Edge.
again? That was John
John
Francis, right?
Francis.
Okay.
Yeah. And in it, so he was journaling throughout this, like, really doing deep work, understanding that he's no different than the oil companies, the people in the ships, the, you know, all the people who
Wow.
are polluting the earth, all the people who don't give a
That's
shit
deep.
about the earth. He realized he was them, right?
Yeah,
And then,
that's a hard realization to get to for especially for an activist today,
yeah.
because part of your persona is almost that righteousness that they bestow upon you. That like now you're sainted or something like that, and you can go out and tell people what to do. But really, that internal work can lead you to that place of understanding of that. It's like, man, I'm kind of messed up too. Maybe we need each other. You
Hmm.
know?
That's it. And would he ever have happened upon that realization without silence? Maybe. That could be. But as deeply as maybe he did, and maybe as uh, impactfully as he did, I'm not sure. that's really, he's a powerful person, like one of my
Wow.
mentors, you know.
I love that. And I think part of the story that's cool is that when at the end, when you said he spoke at that after 17 years or whatever, and he finally spoke, it kind of makes me think in some ways we have um and this kind of goes back to your idea of just like everyday refueling. And in the Judeo-Christian worldview, it would be kind of like that idea of picking up your cross every day, and that idea that I don't know, we have this capacity in us that can transcend us. And I sometimes feel like the more we talk, it's almost like it's like letting the air out slowly. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, you might have something valid to say, but now the power of your words over like the long haul has maybe gone down a little bit. You can't have that takeoff because you've let out too much air. And I struggle with this personally because I see this a lot in myself to where I feel like I have something to say and I have to hold my tongue a lot. And even then, I still sometimes fail. And it's like this battle internally to make sure that my words are measured and that they have impact. And once you plug into that, like that daily routine, that daily whatever it is for you, you begin to become more comfortable in that space of not speaking. I think that that's what I've learned, at least, is like the more I spend time with myself and just sit with those thoughts, I don't need them to be validated by some external source. I become comfortable just observing, learning, and being okay with that. And then when that moment comes to where somebody does ask me my opinion, cool. I've had a lot of time to mull it over. It might not be as fragmented as it would have been if I would have just released it back then when it was still or really, radicalized or whatever thought pattern in my head. And so I think that I don't know, to me, silence is almost like it's like charging up in a way.
Mm,
And um I think that when we take that time, we can all begin to give in the situation instead of everybody trying to take licks off each other and try to like when you come from a place of just internally being okay with yourself and being abundant in your own, I don't know, your own source or your own sense of self. I feel like then you can give more authentically and you're not being as um I don't know, you're not trying to dictate the situation as much as you are just trying to understand everybody and understand your context within it and just do the best that you can given the situation.
mhm.
And yeah, like I don't know. I think I have I'm super respectful of your time. So I have like a couple more questions and then I'll let you go. But I think one of the things I really wanted to hear you speak on too is just this idea of the like we talked a little about this distinction between silence and action and kind of how those aren't the same thing. I wanted to kind of maybe flip that a little bit and say how maybe speaking isn't necessarily action. Like silence can be perceived as inaction, and that's not always true. How can,
Mm,
on the flip side, speaking, which is often seen as action, can sometimes actually be the opposite?
mm. Yeah, and I think that's in general how it is in our paradigm of Twitter and Facebook and
Mm,
and meme culture and it's like you quick share something uh and then all of a sudden, like, I question the feeling, the immediate feeling right after you share something supporting a specific thing. Like, in that moment, do you feel like you are righteous, or do you feel like
mm.
you are helping someone, or do you feel like
Like, are you adding value? Are
yeah,
you
you're adding value, or you just like dumped your your huge bag that you're carrying out there.
just projecting insecurities or adding value? That's a good way to think of it.
Right. And so yeah, I mean, it goes into what you were saying. Sometimes the silence is building energy, but
Yeah.
when we feel this social pressure, this really intense, like, if you don't speak, if you don't post every day, or if you don't post every hour, like it can be as extreme or as loose as I guess the social majority wants it to be. But if you're if you're feeling the need to do this and you're doing it, you might be relieving that energy and then not really building into something. Like you might be choosing that as your action instead of actual action. You might be,
That's what yeah.
you know, right. And so
It's like the false
it's
positive. We give ourselves the false positive of, yeah. And it's like,
yeah, right. And we're human. We only have, you know, to a certain degree, a finite amount of energy, especially if we're, if we're the average human, say. And so uh sometimes, yeah, there is a choice between saying something and then doing something. Sometimes there's not always a choice, and I think it can be used as a cop out, right?
yeah,
um and so I definitely want to be careful, because I do think we can do both, and in a lot of cases it's good to do both: speak and act, um, spread awareness, and go to the rallies, and uh, you know uh, uh, restructure your whole education system so that it's more suitable to not just the privileged. And
yeah.
like on the farm, uh, I can sequester more carbon, so that our earth
Yeah, I don't
doesn't
know what
burn
that
up as
is.
quickly. Or and offer a pay what you can weekly box for people who are
Mm.
uh, financially suffering. And I can't I know I can say a lot, and I have a voice that can be powerful, but I know I can't be up on Twitter all day, because then my plants are gonna go. Uh, I'm not gonna be sequestering carbon as effectively as I want to be. I'm not gonna be growing as much food as I'm not gonna be feeding as much. I'm not gonna be, it
That
goes
might
on and
be you. I think that might be it. Like that might be it. And we can kind of end on this too. Is that idea of doing something that is valuable, outweighing saying something, but the problem being that maybe not everybody has something valuable to do or something that they
on.
feel drawn towards. And so in the absence of that, it's like a vacuum, right? You just go to the nearest platform and
Yeah.
that becomes your your action for the day. And I mean, I'm sure you know too how easy it can be. Like I remember days of like Vine, and now it's TikTok. I'm not going on that app, but it I'm sure it's the same thing to where you can spend hours on that thing and not even like realize it. Like you look up and it's like dark out. And you're like, what? Like, you know what I mean? It's like it's just this suction that's consistent in our culture. And I feel like if we don't really think about what we want, like if I had to break down everything you said, and I think one of the main nuggets, at least that I took away, is that this idea of having a goal, like what do you want in like 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, like having some sort of long-term vision for what you want and then working towards that. In a way, that's what winning is.
Mm.
Like the destination is cool, but that journey, that's everything, right? And we talk about this a lot too. It's like that journey, the process, like all that stuff in the in between, that's where the real magic happens. And we kind of shortchange ourselves by sometimes not realizing that there is a journey to there, that we can somehow just close the gap and do one thing, and now we've sealed it off, we've wrapped it up, got a nice bow on it. Even it's a black bow on it. It's like, oh, I'm good now. And it's like,
No, okay. That's what I'm saying. Like, we can't be vague anymore. We can't be vague. We need to actually figure out what we're gonna do. Like, we need a detailed plan. But
yeah,
one of the most beautiful things I've learned from farming is And so in the winter, I plan every single day from really February until November, every single day. What
Damn.
I'm gonna do when I wake up and throughout the whole day, and then up until when I go to bed.
Wow.
And so and
I
it's
didn't realize
intense.
it was
And
that
I'm not
intentional.
saying you have to follow that to black and white, but you need to be doing within a couple days of what you plan to do, or else things aren't going to get done.
Yeah.
Because one of the
Because it's
human
still a
tendencies.
nature. It's still
Yeah,
nature. It's still going to
yeah,
do its thing, as you were saying at the beginning. But if you just approach it with no concept of what you're trying to accomplish, then you're going to end up with not a garden.
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, we need that silence to really plan. We need to
Yeah.
figure it out.
I think that's a good way to end it. Like, I think at the end of the day, silence as violence is an idea that I think has an ounce of truth to it. And there's this sort of, I think the heart kind of behind it can be right. Like, we want people to speak. If you know, if you see something and you understand and you have a level of, I don't know, awareness to speak life and love into that situation, do it, please, because we need more of that.
Mhm.
But we also need less of the other type of talking, which is just bloviating and getting off whatever steam you need to get off, and projection of all your baggage and all the other stuff that can get in the way of real progress. That type of silence we will gladly accept, I think, as a culture. Just being able to know when you are not necessarily contributing. And I think this is, I'm speaking to myself. Everything that I speak to Jess about, by the way, if you're still listening, appreciate you. But everything I talk about on this is something that I am internally trying to work through myself. Just because I can articulate it doesn't mean that I figured it out. So please understand me. I'm not trying to lecture. I'm just trying to say that
Mhm.
this time period, it calls for something deeper than the surface level social media activism. And I know that a lot of your hearts are in the right place. And I just want to challenge you to use that right place to fuel you to another level of truth, to where you are actually pursuing true, I don't know, that true diversity, not the quota type, not the whatever type, but the true, like, I love you and your perspective, and though it's not the same as mine, we can learn a lot from each other and we can grow together. And I think that only comes from the depth that only is unlocked through being silent with yourself. And so I just really wanted to talk to you about that. I think you just illuminated that perfectly. So I really want to thank you. I don't know if you have anything else that you wanted to maybe say on the topic, or um, last chastisements for the urban dwelling folks.
I'm with those people, and really, like, I feel called, like, one of the things I'm passionate about is food and seed sovereignty. Um, so I want to be be in the flow of helping all people have just a little bit more of nature, just a little bit more access to food. Just be saving seed in their specific environment, so that they can have some security with that, because we all need food. Um,
Yeah,
and and so uh, like, I'm all about the urban dwellers, and want to
I can
be a
tell.
force united.
I got to work on my beard. I'm gonna get there soon. But man, thank you so much. Hope all the plants grow up well. I know you're like, I can see that you're working hard out there. So I'm gonna let you get back to that, whatever you're doing today. Continue on doing some great stuff. Thank you so much again. Appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate you too, bro.